Here, what a fantastic venue. I'm from Glasgow. I've come past this front door maybe 2,000 times in my life, and I've never actually come in to the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, and I'm glad that I have at last done that. What a super venue. You know, the marble columns, the chandeliers, the stained glass, the oil paintings. It just reminds me of the DPC offices in the basement at University Gardens. Anyway, my name is William Kilbride. I am the director of the Digital Preservation Coalition, and it's my privilege and my pleasure to welcome you here today and to get today's event up and running. A few bits of household before we go. So you've already seen where teas and coffees are served. The toilets are down there. Lunch will be there. And there's also a little cloakroom at the side there if you want to take advantage of that. Also, there's Wi-Fi. So help yourself to the public Wi-Fi. It came up to me very quickly. I think it's RPCSG _ event. Is that right? And then there's just a quick login. You just tick the box and you're straight in. They give you instructions of what you're allowed to use the Wi-Fi for. So no downloading of movies, apparently, during the presentations. But why would you do that? We've also got, in addition to the Wi-Fi allows us to tweet. As always, DPC events have a very lively Twitter following. And the hashtag we're using is hashtag #RDM4all. So that's the, I'll put that up on the screen later over the coffee, over the lunch break, so you can pick that up. But RDM4all, if anyone's on Twitter. So I encourage you to do that, because as always, there's more people who want to be here than are able to attend. And not only are we therefore amplifying the event with Twitter, but we've also got the live webcast, and I think we are webcasting, aren't we? It's not simply a recording. So just to explain, therefore, when it comes to Q&A, there'll be microphones. Those microphones aren't just about amplification, it's so that people who are outside of the room can also participate. So please do be patient with us as we get the microphones round to you. So I'll do my usual question before I go any further and make sure everyone's in the right room. Does anyone rather be at a different event or is looking for a different event? Then now's your chance before we launch off. So, welcome. I have a few minutes by way of introduction to the event, and I want to start with an acknowledgement to Jisc, to John Kay and Paul Stokes, in particular at Jisc, who have sponsored today's workshop. Today's workshop is actually one of 4. There's a mini-series. This is number 2 on that mini-series. And coming to Glasgow makes it a world tour, I suppose, of research data management initiatives. I'm not going to say much about Jisc's work in the research data shared service space, or indeed the long history of Jisc's involvement with research data management. But what I want to do is to pose the question which underpins this whole mini-series, really the purpose of our working with Jisc to support this program and to deliver this mini-series. And really the question is the core question at the heart of today's workshop, which is to ask the development and benefit of research data management. How do we maximize the development and the application of that infrastructure for all? So we have a series of activities around the development of research data. What are the implications of those activities for different sectors, for different parts of higher education, for different types of institution outside of higher education? Research data management has arisen as a key requirement in higher education, and you're going to hear a number of case studies on that later as the day continues. So we'll hear from STFC, Large Research Infrastructure, and we'll hear also from a number of universities, from Lancaster University, Glasgow University, Edinburgh University, and others. And the development of research data and the development of tools around research data management has created opportunities for universities to do new things and to make data accessible in a variety of new ways and to make differences and changes and advances in research. So it's not simply a question of research data management for the data users, it's also potentially for the data creators. And in many different, in almost every different institution, the responsibility for research data has landed with some one or other section of the university. So to express it, you know, there are, in some institutions you will find a research data management department. In others you will find that a subsection of the library. Maybe an institutional repository has responsibility for research data. In other institutions you might find this embedded within special collections or within some component of the university archives or records management function. In other places you might find it within the enterprise unit encouraging the reuse and impact of university resources. So a range of different institutional functions have arisen to manage research data. And the core question then arises is, what can that infrastructure offer to everyone else? In the Digital Preservation Coalition, obviously our principal concern is around digital preservation. So the development of research data infrastructure creates an opportunity for digital preservation, not simply for the research data, but across the institution. And the extent to which that opportunity can be taken advantage of is really the key question for us today. Let me say a word about digital preservation. It occurs to me that there are many different words used to describe this question of long-term access to data. It used to be fashionable to talk about permanent access. It's also fashionable sometimes to talk about digital curation. Sometimes long-term access is all we need to talk about. Sometimes reproducibility is the theme. Sometimes business continuity. Sometimes digital resilience, digital continuity, digital longevity, digital archiving. All of these words are in different contexts in use. And that doesn't bother me too much. So I work for the Digital Preservation Coalition, and if we can simply start with a kind of an assumption that we have a challenge to make this data in whatever format available for people in the long term, I don't really mind what we call it, as long as we call it something that everyone in some sense is able to understand in their own context. So, in the development of research data management, we then present the question, what is the digital preservation infrastructure? What infrastructure is developed to provide that long-term access? And can that infrastructure be deployed more widely for the institutional benefit? So what's the implication of research data management when you have that infrastructure? Can it be used to support, for example, institutional records management? Can it be used to support institutional archives? What's the implication, not simply for doing better collections management, what's the implication for researchers within the institutions? And it could be at the end of this process, we decide that research data management really only helps research data managers. That might be a conclusion we draw. And that would be potentially a valid conclusion. Personally, I think it would be a disappointing conclusion. And I think what we should do is to structure research data management tools and services in such a way that they can have broad impact across an institution. And finally, people. Always, 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 it seems to me, the digital preservation or continuity or curation questions come back to people. And if we develop the skills and capacity for preservation and research data management, how do we extend that learning to the other parts of the institution, not simply in terms of technical capacity, but also in terms of the capacities and skills available to the institution? So I should now ask again, if everyone's in the right room and anyone would like to be at another seminar. We have a fairly full program today. I suppose it would be characterized by a series of case studies in the morning, followed by some more, I don't say think pieces, but kind of maybe emerging trends in the afternoon, followed by quite a long round table discussion where we can probe some of these questions. I'm going to hand on in a moment to Juan, who's going to talk to us about research data management at STFC. But before we go any further, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to maybe invite you all. Has everyone got a bit of paper or a PC or a notepad or a tablet in front of them? I wonder if I could get you all just to do a simple exercise before we go further. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I want you to write down on your sheet of paper or your notepad or whatever what you think the key challenge is to deploying research data, technologies, or solutions within your institution. If you do that now, we'll be well set up for the Q&A at the end of the day. Everyone happy? 2 minutes. This is not going to work for the people on the webcast. So let me say to the people on the webcast, wherever you are, you do it too. You write down your challenges. And indeed, if you're on the webcast and you want to write down some challenges, tweet them or email them to us, and we'll see what we can do in terms of getting an answer from the speakers as the day continues. Okay? Everyone happy? Anyone want to shout out? Maybe I should get the microphones on for this one, but anyone want to shout out what they've written down as what they think is a key challenge to deploying research data management at their institution? Hold on a moment, Paul. I should get you to say who you are and where you're from. Paul Stokes from Jisc.
Paul Stokes from Jisc. The one key challenge for me is who pays for it.
Who pays for it? Anyone else got that written down, by the way? If you've not, then write it down. Anyone else want to share? Oh, Valerie.
It's Valerie McCutcheon from the University of Glasgow. So we've bought some stuff, but sometimes it takes a long time to get it in the queue for IT services to connect up software and hardware.
Mm-hmm. Show of hands of anyone who's had that experience. I guess that's fairly common. And there was another question, hand one over here. Yes.
Hi, Bill Ayres, University of Salford. Engagement is one of the things that we face a challenge with, getting people to actually engage with using the tools and the services that we offer.
Yes. Again, anyone else got that down in their long list? Yes, of course, of course. Good. Well, let's leave it there for now. I'm going to hand over to Juan. We're pretty much on schedule. I'll get your presentation started up, Juan. I guess it's here. And we're off.
It's on. Okay. So can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, good. That's enough. Okay, thanks. Thanks, William. So I'm Juan Bicaregui. I'm from the Science and Technology Facilities Council, one of the research councils, one of the 7 research councils in the UK, at least for the next 10 weeks or so, before we merge into UK Research and Innovation. I'm in the scientific computing at Rutherford Appleton Laboratory. Rutherford Appleton Laboratory has got a lot of national facilities for physical sciences, and scientific computing department, among other things, does the compute and data management for those. And my day job really is making sure that we have systems in place that keep the data and catalogue the data, make it available to the visitors. The visitors are academics who come to use the equipment at our laboratory. What am I going to talk about today? Well, that's not asking you. That's who are the people around there that think data management is important. I've also, over the last 10 years or so, done a lot of work on data policy with the research councils. And the research councils certainly think data management is important, but not only them. But I want to talk quite a bit about why. I think I think you all probably have your own reasons, if it's your day job, for thinking data management is important. But starting from a pretty high level, I'll talk about why the governments and research funders think it is. So what do governments say? What do research councils say? And then moving on to the particular theme that I'm involved with at the moment, which is open science, and in particular the European Open Science Cloud, which is a big European program of projects that is going to make all the data collected by research in Europe interoperable and available, etc., eventually. Before I start, I'll just give you a little bit of background of where I'm from. So that's an aerial photograph of the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, probably about more than 10 years ago now, I'm afraid. And I wonder if this thing's got a laser. No. So at the top here, oh, I know, it's in here. So the Science and Technology Facilities Council has programs in physical sciences. We have a neutron source which is used, so where we create neutrons, fire them through a sample, and watch the diffraction pattern that comes off the back and work out properties of the sample. And we can do that with neutrons or with photons, so the neutron source and the synchrotron do the same kind of experiments. We have some very high-powered lasers that put 100 joules of energy is not a lot of energy, but you put that into a sample in a femtosecond, 10 to the minus 18 of a second, I think, and it gets extremely hot for a very short time, and then that explodes, and you can watch the traces of bits that come off, so you can do particle physics with lasers on that. We have a space science department, particle physics department, which is the UK end of the CERN, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, so the data from CERN to the UK comes through our machine room and then out to the universities. Then computing and data management, my department, and then other things as well, including nuclear physics, radio communications, and the like. And this instrument at the top there is the diamond synchrotron. It's 250 meters across. It also cost roughly £250 million to build, so it's a dual meaning of that. That accelerates electrons round the ring, and then at the corners it gives off photons, and the photons go through the sample and get collected on cameras behind. And they're one of the biggest data producers for us. Some of the new instruments there are producing gigabytes a second of data when they're switched on, which is for some hours at a time. But not only is it the volume of data that's the issue, it's the number of files. So they produce 600 files a second. So in our metadata catalog, we have to catalog 600 files a second. So it's quite a challenge. It has to run smoothly without any hiccups, no breaks in the network, nothing. No little reboots, no time for a reboot, or we get in a big mess. So it's the number of files as much as the data volumes. Down here, half built at the time, was the second target station for the neutron source. There's a first target station down here, and then the second one much bigger. So the same sort of thing, but with neutrons. The data rates are much smaller on the neutron source, luckily. And then the laser facility I already mentioned in the middle there, putting very, very tiny spot of light for a very small amount of time. So that's our old computer building that is now an innovation sort of park for SMEs, and that piece of grass there is where the new computer building is. As I said, it's about 5 years old now, the building, so it's quite an old photograph. We have another laboratory in Daresbury where the UK synchrotron used to be before Diamond was built. We have we pay the UK subscription towards the international facilities. So at Grenoble in southern France, there's a synchrotron rather like ours, where with the UK part, and there's a neutron source, which is a reactor-based neutron source rather than a spallation source, which ours is. And then, of course, the square kilometre array, some of you may have heard about, is a big radio telescope that's being built in southern Africa and in Australia. And the data rates from that, when it comes online in about, I think it's probably about 5 years from now, are something that we can't even imagine today. So we're relying on the technology improving as quickly as we can build the instruments so that the computing is ready. And of course the Large Hadron Collider, you've probably heard of in CERN, where we collect the UK part component of that. The Scientific Computing Department, so we do the data handling and analysis from those experiments, the different kinds of things that I said. We do applications development for the data analysis software. We run the high-performance compute and data facilities. The department's got about 160 staff, roughly. We support 10,000 users, do a lot of training per year, and produce some publications, roughly a budget of £12 million per year for the department. And these diagrams here are supposed to indicate the different scale of the things we do. So down here we've got particle physics pattern. So that's at the subatomic level. We've got molecular work which is done on the synchrotron, which is used for pharmaceuticals and the like, where we can see the structure of the molecules. We do things at the sort of meter scale with engineering, and then the square kilometre array, which is doing things at the scales of galaxies. So it really does cover a big different range of things. So firstly, who thinks data management is important? Well, I've been in this game roughly 10 years, and a decade ago or so, when I started, it was OECD that were pushing the agenda. They made a recommendation on access to data from public funding, which there had been things previously, but I think this was the first one that came to my attention. And it basically says that research data that's coming out of publicly funded research should be made available to the public. And that is a really important principle. It took quite a while to catch on, but now I think most people are accepting that, and it is quite different from the situation before. Then the Commission followed up with a number of communications, and there were some expert groups. And then in 2011 onwards, the G8 got into the game, and I was involved in the group that came out with various things, and I'll go into those in a little bit more detail later. And now when we get to the 27, by the time we get to 2017, they're making very specific comments on the way you should manage data. Why is it important? Well, there's different views on this. There's at least 3 different reasons. My favorite is the Raw Society one. It's the scientific reason. It's about science as an open enterprise in order to make the inquiry peer reviewable. You can't really judge a paper unless you can see the data that's behind it. And I think back in the day, papers used to contain their data in the table at the end, and people could look at it. And then somewhere along the line, that got lost. And then the papers were coming out when the reviewers of the paper and the readers of the paper had no access to the data that produced the conclusions. And that, therefore, is kind of taking away the transparency of the science. And now, so this is a move. One of the scientific reasons is to make sure that the science can self-correct if error by peer review. Science's powerful capacity for self-correction comes from this openness to scrutiny and challenge. That's the fundamental thing from science. But other bodies look at it differently. Data reuse is another angle. If you're a research funder and you fund the collection of some data, if that data can be used for many different purposes, then obviously that's getting more value for your investment. If you're a government supporting, wanting to trigger innovation, wanting to get new startups, whatever, you can get an industry of startups. Sorry, that's my phone. How do I... better put it on. Yes, so triggering innovation, other things that you can do with the data other than the science the research it was created for is another angle, and I'll come on to that later as well. So here is a naive, a very high level view of what data management is. We have some data, we create some data somewhere, off instruments or from simulations or whatever it is, or by doing some surveys or questionnaires or whatever. We keep it for a while and we access it later. It's very simple. And in order to do that, we have a whole load of infrastructure. We have storage and compute and network and various services on top of that, and curation services. And that's and I lay it out in that way because I want to emphasize that the researcher really is not interested in these top and bottom bit. They just want to create the data and then get it later and not have to worry about how it managed to stay there. The infrastructure provider, like ourselves, we're interested in this vertical angle on it. We want to make sure that the kit all stays there and all works so that the horizontal bit can be done. If we do our job really well, the researcher shouldn't know that we're doing it in the way you don't understand. You don't need to know how the lights work, how your car engine works. You should not need to know how we're managing to keep that data for the time it's needed, how we're able to retrieve it later, etc. And this theme of the sort of the red and the blue will come back in other slides later. So the red is the researcher's perspective and the blue is the infrastructure provider's perspective. What do governments say about this? Well, I'll pick it up in June 2013, the G8 made this statement. This was part of a communication from science ministers that included other things, future of the seas and oceans, antimicrobial resistance, all these things that make the headlines as the great challenges. This is also in there, but it doesn't make the headlines quite as much, but never mind, it's agreement across G8 at the time, later to become G7. Publicly funded research should be open. That's a very important statement. Here we have the beginnings of the FAIR principles: discoverable, accessible, assessable, intelligible, usable, and wherever possible, interoperable. More or less the same thing as findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But for me, the word accessible is in here, which is really, really important, and it's kind of lost in FAIR probably because it sounds a bit like accessible. People remember the accessible and forget the accessible. It's no good getting data if you don't know what it is, if you don't know what the data quality is, if you don't even know what it is at all. If you need to be able to assess, is it the data that you need? So access is part of the story, but accessible is even more important. Well, no, if you can't access it, there's no point in assessing it, but it's certainly as important if you're going to use it for anything. And then there's an argument around cost. The first principle, and this is mirrored in the RC UK principles as well, that kind of implies that we should keep it and keep everything, but of course that's going to cost money, so we need to make a value judgment about what's worth keeping and how much effort we should put into keeping what. That's a very difficult thing, as I'm sure a lot of the memory institution people here know. And then there's the cultural thing about recognition that this is an important part of the research process. So this is not just now the UK or the research councils or the European Commission saying this is the G8, and it has actually changed. It's kind of made an agreement across various things, various big important countries that we're all going to do this. So in 2015, the same sort of thing. Oh, this is where the future of the seas and oceans was. And here they make two things. Further progress on sharing and managing scientific data and information, in particular following up with the Research Data Alliance, which I may imagine that maybe quite a few of you have heard of, and if not, I'm going to give you one slide in a minute. It's a body that's trying to help break down the barriers to data sharing, and that it should be interoperable data management, effective and open data science environment. And this phrase, open data science environment, was, I think, a better name for what is also called Open Science Cloud. And because it emphasizes that it's around an environment around open data rather than open compute. The RDA, briefly, is a body that's around openly sharing data, building the social and technical bridges that enable data sharing. It's been running for about 5 years now. We have about 6,000 individuals in 90 working groups doing a very bottom-up organization, developing standards or whatever it is that people have, wherever the problem is in people's day jobs. This is a way of sharing that problem with others and establishing a group to work on it together in the context of something that then gives it some status. 2017, Open Science was a whole section in the communique from the G7 ministers, and they put up front the recognition, the cultural side of things, better recognize and reward open science activities. This is possibly the biggest barrier, in my view at least, to data sharing at the moment. And then they put the technical things about deposit access and analyze and make things fair. But the cultural things have come up to the top. What do the research councils say? Well, 2011 we put some principles on data policy out. 2015 we put some guidance behind that. These principles are sort of 1 or 2 sentences each. This made a page or 2 behind each principle explaining what it is. And then in 2016 we made the joint concordat with RC UK, HEFKey, Jisc, Wellcome Trust and Universities UK. Basically these all say the same kind of thing. The thing is who is saying it is changing. So the fact that the concordat is joint with the universities and Wellcome is an important extra thing. And the concordat also gives us a definition of research data, which does help. We failed to do that in the principles because we couldn't agree. That's interesting, isn't it? And a bit on the why. Support or validate research project observations, findings or outputs. So this is the Raw Society motivation that is brought out in the concordat. This is a rather old slide, but I'll just go because this is nice and simple and we can get a head around these 7 things. Data are public good. Publicly funded research are a public good, produced in the public interest, which should be made openly available with as few restrictions as possible in a timely and responsible manner. So that is really the motivating thing. And then the rest are sort of means to an end. Data should be managed. These are paraphrased. Data should be discoverable. There may be constraints on what you make available. Originators have the first use. Reusers have responsibilities, and data sharing is not free. You know, there are costs involved, and they're valid costs to research. Now, I wanted to, the reason I put this up here and choose these rather than concordat, which is newer, is because with these, certainly numbers 1 to 6 can be put on a kind of 3D plot. to show that there are inherent tensions in these different principles. They all sound good, but when you actually start thinking about what we have to do to make that happen, there are tensions. And the first two, data are a public good, but it has to be managed. You can kind of think of it as a tension around the data itself. It's going to be a public good. Well, the tragedy of the commons says you can't just make something a public good. Somebody has to look after it. And so you have the two, there's kind of tension along there around the data itself. Everyone can access it, but somebody takes responsibility for maintaining it. And that is a tension that has to be managed on a very individual basis. For each data set, you have to think about who has the responsibility for it. Maybe it's the collector, but it's not always. The third and fourth are around discoverability or access. The number 3 says it should be discoverable, but number 4 says there may be constraints on what's available or what hoops you have to go through to actually get the data, if there's personal data in there or whatever. There are hoops you will have to go through. So there's a tension there as well around access. And then the 5 and 6 are about the intellectual property. There's a principle that originators have the right for first use so that they can do the initial analysis, and on the other hand, that the reusers have a responsibility to acknowledge the principles. Number 5, I personally have an issue with because it's a mechanism that's been put in place so that the creators of the data can get some credit by writing papers. But that is accepting the status quo that it's the papers that are getting credit, not the data. In an ideal world, I would say it's better that you should make the data available immediately and then just have mechanisms in place so that the academic kudos, the brownie points, come back to whoever put the intellectual input in. It's not always the creation of the data where the intellectual input comes. Sometimes it's even just asking the question, stating the hypothesis that you're working on. That already might be 9/10 of solving the problem. Sometimes it's the methodology, how are you going to collect the data? Sometimes it's building the instrument that's going to collect the data. Sometimes it's the actual collection, maybe it's the data analysis where the real creativity was, writing the software that managed to do the data analysis in some new way or something. So which part of the data pipeline is where the intellectual input is varies depending on the different piece of research. And so just saying that you can keep the data until you publish a paper is a very, very blunt instrument. It'd be much better if we could really pinpoint where the contribution is coming and give due credit then. And then, for the greater good, of course, if I let my data out straight away and 5 papers are published off it before mine, well, actually, if you look at the community as a whole, that's better than if I had to wait for me to publish mine. So, but we just have to make sure the recognition is there to match it. Another perspective on why data management's a good thing is the innovation lifecycle. So the body of knowledge is this data that's created from the research process. So we want to enable knowledge creation. This is sort of suitable for politician kind of level, right? So we want to enable knowledge creation through the research process to improve our understanding and contribute to the body of knowledge. And then, from the body of knowledge, we can do this sort of innovation life cycle where we have enabling wealth creation, improve the quality of the life of the citizens, and feedback into the body of knowledge. And these two things interact through the research outputs. And from some perspective, that's why we're doing the research. It's not for the sake of knowledge, it's to have the innovation that comes off the back of it, the new technology, or whatever it is that improves our quality of life. And the aggregation of knowledge lies at the heart of this. And again, I'll come back to that diagram later. I just wanted to emphasize that it's not a single body of knowledge, of course, it's distributed all over the place. So moving on now to what the European Union have said. In 2016, communication from the European Union on European cloud initiatives, accepting the fact that we've said that the data should be open, what are the barriers that are not letting us reach the full potential from that data? Well, in saying the data's not always open and there are lack of incentives and rewards for sharing, there's lack of interoperability, and noting deep-rooted walls between the disciplines, and that really is a very strong cultural thing. There is no mechanism in place why somebody from physics should want their paper, their data used in biology maybe. They get no credit at all in their community if the data is used by a different community. because it's a very introspective sort of, each field is very introspective. So the cultural walls between disciplines are just as important as the technical ones. The fact that they're running on different equipment is a sort of technical silo. There's also cultural ones. Fragmentation between the different data infrastructures that are split by scientific and economic domains, by geographical things, and by different governance. So we have funding lines. Each funding line produces some infrastructure, and it runs that infrastructure, and it's governed according to whatever its governance is. And there's no motivation for sharing across those. And those three really are the motivation for the Open Science Cloud that I'll talk about in a minute. The last two are slightly different. The one's about high-performance computing and the need for, in particular, the Commission was saying that Europe needs to up its game in terms of HPC and about data analysis and big data. But those three, about the incentives and rewards, the interoperability, and the interoperability of the data and the interoperability of the technology are the motivations for the European Open Science Cloud. And it said in order to develop the European Open Science Cloud, it's going to be necessary to make all the data produced by Horizon 2020, by the European framework programs, open by default. So that's already quite a strong statement. Raise awareness and change incentive structures, and develop specifications for interoperability and data sharing across disciplines. So these are really the most important things that they were saying that the European Open Science is going to bring. I put these, another one of my little diagrams. You can, if you try hard, you can make the whole research life cycle all begin in C. So I call it the 7 Cs. So, you know, some people get together, form a collaboration to do some research. That research leads to the creation of some data, which is then stored somewhere in some capacity storage. We do some computation on that data. We probably curate the results or the whole pipeline. We collect together different bits of data in order to prove a hypothesis or otherwise, and then communicate that through papers. And then those papers are where things get out into the open and then form new collaborations, and the cycle goes round again. That's the old way, and I'll come to the new way in a minute. The top half of this is around papers, really, and forming collaborations. That's kind of open access in a very general way. The bottom half is about the data, the creation of the data and the compute and the data analysis. We call that open data. And the whole thing together is open science. Now, the Open Science Cloud is going to replace that or augment that. What's it going to do in particular? Well, the 7 activities are still going to be there, but communication happens at every stage. At every stage in the life cycle, you communicate the outputs. And new collaborations are going to form from that, again, at every stage in the output. But this makes a very complicated and confusing diagram. So it becomes much better if you put the collaboration and communication in the middle, and you say that that's the body of knowledge. It's collaborated and communicated, and the interactions all happen with this infrastructure, which is, of course, a distributed infrastructure, but they all happen with this infrastructure in the middle at every stage. So we don't wait for the paper in order to communicate the results. Every stage in the process is communicated. It's a distributed infrastructure, of course. What does it do to the innovation life cycle? Well, a very similar thing. The body of knowledge is still there, but each of these different things is all communicating directly. And so if a bit of improved understanding was going to lead immediately to some innovation, it doesn't have to wait for this cycle to happen. That's, again, the Open Science Cloud. Project I'm leading is the European Open Science Cloud pilot project. So the communication came out in 2016, 2017. January last year, we started the European Open Science Cloud pilot. And it's going to support the first phase of the development of the European Open Science Cloud. And we identified 3 different areas where we have to make some progress. We've got scientific challenges, surely. We want to identify what are the things we're going to enable through this. We've got technical challenges around interoperability of data and interoperability of infrastructure. But we also have cultural challenges. We've got to change the ways of working. And that, for me, is the really hard part. The scientific challenges are really opportunities. These are the things we want to do. The technical challenges are the barriers, and the cultural ones are also barriers, and in my mind, the hardest barriers to overcome. So there's a body in Europe called the E-Infrastructure Reflection Group. It's been running for a while, and they had this diagram of the Eos a few years ago, which I think is very good. And they noted the disciplinary silos, and remembering the red and the blue from before, this time it's 90 degrees flipped over. The red are the working environment of the researcher, their silos. So the researcher is probably at the top of one of these, and if it's bioinformatics, they're using the bioinformatics portal here, and that's supported by a whole infrastructure down through the layers of software to a whole e-infrastructure supporting bioinformatics, and each discipline has its own separate silos. At the same time, we've got some horizontal e-infrastructures, as they're called. This might be some capacity storage that's used by lots of different people. Might be some HPC that's used by different people. Certainly the network, we share a network pretty much with all the different researchers. So the horizontal things are the things that are shared, and they say, well, the Open Science Cloud is about sharing those resources there. Now the question is, where does the researcher now fit? Does the researcher still come into their portal here, or is the researcher coming into some generic service? And there are different views here, and in fact, from the part of the commission that are funding this, they imagine that this is right up here, and the researchers are coming into a sort of generic portal into the infrastructure. I'm a bit less, I think we'd better get there in stages, let's say. So I think what we can do is provide a sort of horizontal layer that sits above all this, where the separate disciplinary access points can communicate. And as I said before, the researcher doesn't want to worry about this. They don't want to change the way they're interacting. They want to carry on using the portal that they've always used. But the functionality of that portal will be enhanced behind the scenes because it has access to a broader range of data, a broader range of technology, more compute, whatever, more specialist compute systems. So I see it still as disciplinary portal sitting on top of a generic horizontal infrastructure. EOS pilot is just a pilot. It's not going to build the European Open Science Cloud. It's not even a design study. We're not really going to come out with the design. It was a 2-year project. We've got 60 partners across Europe, so it's a big, thin project. It's 10 million euros, 60 partners, so there's lots of organizations with a little bit of money each. And it's not going to do a design, it's about talking, it's about getting people working together. It's a set of experiments and a set of design proposals. A bit like a requirement study, and it runs for 1 more year, but already just started at the beginning of this year, are a whole bunch of follow-up projects that have got a bigger scale. So Eos Hub is 30 million, Freya and these others are 10 million each. OpenAir and Freya are 10 million each. So there's another tranche of projects that are taking the outputs of EOS Pilot and bringing them in to real services. So EOS Hub is 70 partners, and it's got, they're really the service providers in EOS Hub. They're the ones who are going to develop the services and make them interoperate. Hopefully over the next 3 years they'll make significant progress. And now there are calls open for another bunch of projects that are coming up. One around how we're going to govern the whole thing, one about how do we instill the fair culture, and others. And this is a program that runs through to 2022. And this part has a budget of about 300 million from the Commission, which will be added to by member states' contributions as well. And there are also thematic clouds. So this is the kind of horizontal generic stuff. There are also thematic clouds being talked about. There's a food cloud. There's a blue cloud for all marine things. There's a food and agriculture cloud and the like. So it's really a theme that is very strongly integrated in all the European programs. And in the UK as well, this is, so obviously it's a difficult time for the UK's involvement with Europe, but what will the UK do to integrate with this? We'll certainly be part of it in one way or another. Okay, so I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I'll just finish with a little quote from Einstein. From his 75th birthday, still sharp. By academic freedom, I understand the right to search for truth and to publish and teach what one holds to be true. So that's the easy bit. That's the bit we've always done. The right also implies a duty. One must not conceal any part of what one has recognized to be true. Now, in 1954, when he said this, he was thinking about the arms race, the nuclear arms race, and all the research that was going into nuclear weapons, atomic weapons, and he was saying that shouldn't be confined to the US. But I think we could use it now in a slightly different context and say, well, this means that you publish everything all the time, not just choose the result you want to publish at the end of some cycle. And finally, just an advert for the RDA. Do come to Berlin with about 600 or 700 people there all doing data sharing. Thank you.
Can I get you just to pop back
Mm-hmm.
to the slide?
Which one? Which one? The quote, yeah. So the Photoshop here is also, to be honest, right? This is a neutron-proof door from our neutron source. It's quite a heavy door. You don't open and close that very often. And I've stuck a bit of countryside in there. That's really the instrument behind there. No.
So I asked this opening presentation to really ask the question: what is good practice?
Mm-hmm.
What is good practice in research data management? Because it seems to me if we can define what good practice in research data, we need to do that first before we can identify what the benefits might be for others, because we have to do the research data management part well before we can potentially share those benefits. And actually that final quote there, it seems to me to crystallize a lot of in the answer to that question. So we have the open computing and the open data and the open access, all the different components which work together, which represent good practice in the context of research data. We've got a couple of minutes for a few questions before we move on. So Juan's job is to kind of lay the foundations for us as to what's the space we're operating in, what looks good. We're going to move into a couple of, I think it's 3 case studies in a moment. But are there any questions for Juan before we get going? I have to say I want to ask what we're going to do about the European thing, but that may be a different workshop on a different...
Over coffee.
Over coffee. I'll bring this over.
Nicola Simonson from the Glasgow School of Art. Juan, did you say that one of the thematic clouds was around arts data?
I don't know of that, no. The 2 I mentioned, one's around food, one's agriculture and food, and the other one was blue, as in marine. There may be one around arts and culture, I wouldn't know.
Okay, thank you.
Well, let's find out if there is one, and let's see if we can... I presume the next question was going to be how you get to participate in it. So let's see what we can do about that. Others?
Masood Khokhar from Lancaster University. Thank you very much for your presentation. One of the biggest challenges you talked about was the immense amount of data that's going to come your way now. Just because of the sheer amount and sheer volume and the sheer speed of that data. Do you think STFC is ready for it?
Well, that's the last time he gets to ask a question.
We're used to it. The graph I haven't put on there is one of those exponential curve ones. For us, data doubles every 15 months. Looking back over 20 years, I did looked at what we've had. And the volume of data we've stored has doubled every 15 months over the last 20 years. And that means it's always the case that if you look back, you think that was easy. And if you look forward, you think, oh my God, that's really scary. And that's just the way it's always been. So I think if you look forward, you think, oh no, it's terrible. How are we going to... So a new detector gets made and put on the synchrotron, and it's 10 times as fast as the last one, so you get 10 times as many pictures coming off it, basically. You've got to get that across the road to our archive and catalogue it. So it always looks really difficult, but we've always managed in the past. So, we're always on the edge. And I think that's deliberate. It's good to be right on the edge of what's possible all the time, because that makes the facilities world-leading facilities. If we took a conservative path, then the other facilities in other countries would be ahead of us. So we're always right on the edge of what's possible.
I mean, I'm almost tempted to have a show of hands of anyone else in the room who feels that sort of increasing data sets. Does anyone have that as a problem? Data volumes are increasing. Eh? I'm imagining everyone probably has that problem to some extent. Any more questions? John? Oh, all right. Good stuff. Well, thank you very much, Juan. I think we're done. There'll be time for questions over coffee, including on European policy issues. So we're going to move on. Neil, you're next. Apologies, I forgot to mention you by way of introduction. So we've got a small set now. I think it's 3. I don't have the thing in front of me. I should check. We have 3 case studies from 3 institutions. And the first institution, great pleasure to introduce Neil Stuart from the London School of Economics, and I'll let Neil do the rest of his introduction.
Thank you. Am I on? Can you hear me at the back? Good, okay, thank you. Thanks, William. Yeah, my name is Neil Stuart, and I'm the Digital Library Manager at Lse Library, which is part of the London School of Economics and Political Science. So we've heard about really interesting presentation about the kind of macro level from Juan there. My presentation is going to focus more on, as it were, the micro, on a different subject area, although there is a bit of crossover. In the context of a university library, and tell you a bit about the services we offer and the services we are developing. And I'm going to talk about the challenges and opportunities around this work, and how it relates perhaps to other areas of work in our library and across the institution more generally. So there's a nice picture of Lse Library, spiral staircase, a nice place to work and hopefully a nice place to study as well. I'll give you a bit of context. Lse, for those of you who don't know about it, you're probably able to guess though, is a social science institution primarily, and up until very recently the emphasis has very much been on graduate teaching and research, predominantly around, as it were, the social sciences proper, so economics, political science, sociology, media studies, etc., etc. But we also do research in fields associated with the social sciences, which includes things like mathematics, statistics, allied health studies, biosciences, bioethics. So there is, though we focus on the social sciences, we've got a very wide portfolio of subjects. So as you might expect, we get well funded from the ESRC and the AHRC, but we slightly counterintuitively perhaps also get funding from the EPSRC, the Wellcome, Leverhulme, etc., to fund that research into that wide portfolio of subject areas. I should mention as well that to give you a bit more institutional context, there's a renewed focus on teaching as a result of the recent TEF, the Teaching Excellence Framework, which, to our chagrin, Lse received a bronze, so we've got some work to do in that area. And our new director, Manoush Shafiq, is really getting to grips with teaching at Lse. The library, Lse Library, is also known as the British Library of Political and Economic Science, so it's a major research library for the social sciences with nationally and internationally recognised collections. And I'll talk a bit about some of those collections a bit later in my presentation. We've got a strategic commitment to develop those collections, spaces, both physical and virtual, and communities. And those are, as it were, the 3 strands of our strategy. And this presentation, I hope, will demonstrate how we, in our area of the library, contribute to this strategy with our work in and around research data management. So quite a boring slide, but this is to give you an idea of what as it were, my team does. So the digital library team has got functional responsibility for the 3 areas you see there: the digital library, library's website, and research data management, RDM. I'll tell you a little bit about those so you can hopefully get an idea of how those various areas of work fit together. So the digital library is the service which stores and makes available the library's collections of digitized and born digital material, mainly via a website. It currently uses the Samvera open source development environment, which used to be called Hydra. It recently changed its name, which utilizes a Fedora repository and the Ruby on Rails web development environment. It's a very well-established service. It's been a production service for over 5 years now, and it's been in development longer than that. But it is proving a bit challenging to manage because we have had only a single developer working on that service. So lots of stuff to do with the digital library, but only so many hours for that one developer to do it. So it's under review at the moment with a view to procuring a digital assets management system, which we hope will allow us to manage our considerable sets of digitized and born digital material in a more sustainable way. We also think that review will help. There's potential there to do more with research data as well when we have a digital asset management system. The library's website, that's probably more self-explanatory really. It's worth noting here that we have a web editor now who has sole responsibility for managing and updating the library's website. We used to have a kind of too many cooks spoil the broth model of managing our library website. Dozens of editors and literally thousands and thousands of web pages, which was ridiculous. So we've pared it down now to about 80, so that's good. And again, I'll talk a little bit about how the work on the library's website fits in with the work on RDM more generally. And then we've got RDM itself and the data library, which of course will be the focus of my presentation. So this does make for a bit of an unconventional portfolio, but it was felt kind of back in the day that in fact, to be more accurate, in 2014, that the research data management side of things was still a developmental area for the library, and perhaps for the sector more generally. And that developmental side of things was an area well suited to the digital library team, which has a kind of remit for thinking about innovation in terms of library services. It's also worth saying here that we work very closely with and I think collaboration might be appearing as one of the themes throughout these presentations, if I may venture a guess. It's worth saying here that we work very closely with our colleagues in the research support team and other teams around the library but that research support team have responsibility for our research repositories, LSE Research Online, LSE Theses Online, as well as things like bibliometrics and open access publishing. And again, I'll talk a bit about how we collaborate with those teams. So, the data library. LSE is actually one of the few academic libraries in the UK to have a data librarian position. The data library was established in 1997 as a data reference service, and that's still the core function of the service. It covers the management of around £500,000 worth per annum of subscription data sources, mostly financial market data. But we also provide specialist advice to staff and students on locating, accessing, and using other data resources. Notably here, things like demographic and survey data, which has obviously got an obvious application in the social sciences. Data library service is co-managed with another example of collaboration with our academic liaison librarians. In recent years, we've started to cover responsibility for research data management support in coordination with other specialist support teams around the school. And those include the Research Awards Office, the kind of people you would expect, I suppose, the Research Awards Office, the Research Ethics Committee, the Information Security Team, Governance and Legal, who look after things like data protection and freedom of information. The data library is also developing a capacity to allow access to sensitive data resources through provision of a secure access room and offline data PCs, and we've got some work in development along those lines as well, which I'll talk about a bit later. So here's a graph for you. Probably don't worry too much about the figures. I'll explain what's going on here. So research data management, what we found, the core function of the service has been around data management planning. And the data management planning service involves, again, collaboration with other areas of research and institutional support around the school. Those people I already mentioned, so research division, IT, information security, etc. The support we offer is through providing a customized version of the DCC's DMP online service to allow the creation of data management plans online and spontaneously as researchers and indeed students require. We offer drop-in sessions, we offer training on data management plans and data management planning. And we go out, we try to actively go out to the departments and talk about RDM in the context of information security and data protection and all those things that researchers need to be aware of. We also offer to review and comment on data management plans, and this is what this graph is showing you. So from March 2014 to the end of last year, we reviewed 263 plans. And since October 2016, all research that requires LSE ethics review has to include a data management plan that is reviewed by us in the library and by our IT colleagues. And it's no coincidence that October 2016 is there on the graph. So you can see that as soon as this institutional commitment was made, you get this spike, many, many more data management plans. And what's interesting, I think, there is it's not just from researchers. So the researchers continue to be, for those of you who can see the kind of blue bits here, so we're getting a steady stream of those. But also now, students, both postgraduate and even some undergraduate students, are submitting data management plans as part of their research planning. And that's really encouraging, we think. Some interesting things have come out of the work we've done around DMPs, and I'll just tell you quickly about some of those. We found that data management plans are mostly around qualitative research programs, qualitative studies, which include face-to-face interviews quite often. And there are some issues that we've found around those. So we find that there can be failure to cover what will actually happen to data that is gathered as part of the research, and how that's data gathering is factored into informed consent, or indeed, where data will be put. Data management plans often sketch out improvised information security solutions, so ad hoc, things like, I will put it on a USB key and keep that in a drawer in my office. There's often an emphasis on the removal of direct identifiers in data sets, but not consideration of indirect identifiers, and that, again, is a thing that we try and educate our users on. And there can be poor awareness of consent and appropriate use of social media. We find this again and again. So I am going to use Facebook posts to do sentiment analysis or something along those lines, or I'm going to look at a Twitter data set. The lesson being here, just because something is public doesn't mean it's public property and amenable to public research, or amenable to even private research, I suppose. The final thing I should say about this is it's not me doing all the legwork here, it's my colleague Lawrence Horton. I think, though, that, who's the data librarian at Lse Library, I think, though, that we're going to have to think about trying to broaden this service out. It can't be a one-man band any longer because of the volume of data management plans we're now receiving. Repositories. That's quite difficult to say 3 times in a row. What I'm getting at here is that our RDM and data management planning support is provided in the wider context of services and indeed systems that the library uses and makes available. So just to give you an idea of that, at Lse Library we have the following separate repository services. We have LSE Research Online and LSE Theses Online, which I've mentioned previously, which use ePrints as the software to run those. I've already mentioned our digital library and talked a little bit about that, which uses Samvera. We've got other repository-like services and registries. So we've got Alma Primo as our library management system. We use DataCite for DOIs. We've got Talis Aspire for reading lists, our reading list system. Calm, we've got, in fact, 2 instances of Calm as our archival catalogues. We've got a website which serves exam papers, past papers. And to top all that off, we've got a CRIS coming online, Current Research Information System coming online this year too, which is going to have significant knock-on effects for some, probably, in fact, all of those services. And this is challenging. It's challenging to manage multiple different repositories that use different software platforms and have different use cases. And I think there are some lessons I would draw from this. To libraries and information professionals, it can seem natural and obvious that different functions require different services, and therefore you spin up a new repository to deal with that use case. But I think for our users, this can look hopelessly confusing proliferation of stuff with no clear way of working out what is what. And I think that also can apply to other people, colleagues in the university, notably IT colleagues, who often raise their eyebrows when we come to them and say we need a new system or repository to do this, that, or the other. So this is all by way of giving you some context as to why we've not yet decided to develop a dedicated data repository for LSE. We ask that researchers use LSE Research Online, our research repository, or third-party services, notably. LSE is lucky in that the UK Data Service is a very clear fit for many of the research projects that produce data because of its social science remit. But we also recommend using, for example, Zenodo. There are some more reasons for this as well. That there seems not to be the demands from research colleagues, although having said that, perhaps there's untapped demand, but if there is, we don't currently know about that. We're also very wary of survey fatigue, so asking our researchers what they want over and over again, and then never really coming to a conclusion about what we should do with that information. When we've asked academic colleagues about this in the past, surveys have been inconclusive, so we often have a small and vocal number of respondents saying, do something, we need you to do something, and then a lot of, apathy isn't necessarily the right word, but a lot lower, long tail of lower interest in all this kind of thing. So we're also, I guess, in the kind of fortunate position of not having too much of that EPSRC funding, and the EPSRC has very clear guidance about the need for institutional archiving of research data sets. So because we've dodged that particular bullet, which has meant that perhaps we don't need to join the research data repository gold rush, which has been going on over the last few years. So, and the reason I've got a kind of cards there is the kind of stick or twist analogy, and for the time being we've decided to stick and perhaps see what Jisc are going to produce with the RDM shared service, and then take things from there. I wanted to talk as well about research data management in the context of special collections. I think Kirsty is going to probably talk a bit more about this later as well. I think that RDM has now become, or perhaps maybe has always been, not just something we help our researcher colleagues do, but something that we in the library ourselves do as well. And I'll give you 2 examples of that. The first of those is Charles Booth's London, which is and I always bang on about this at conferences and so on, so apologies if you've heard about this before, but we redeveloped and relaunched our website dedicated to the work of Booth in late 2016, so a year and a bit ago. His primary research outputs were the poverty maps and the notebooks that recorded his findings. So there's an example of the poverty maps. They're very distinctive, and you might hopefully recognize that picture. And I should say there, it's an excellent example of Victorian research data management. And so good it was that we're still reaping the benefits of that now and still serving that material to interested users. we did a lot of research data management to do that redevelopment, so notably data wrangling in the form of metadata on the notebooks, which allowed us then to geolocate those notebooks against the poverty maps. And if you go to Charles Booth's London, you can Google it, other search engines are available. Have a look at the way in which we've tried to associate the notebooks with particular areas of the map. And we're going to need to do more of that because we've just digitized a whole bunch more of those notebooks. We're going to have to think again about how we associate notebooks with the poverty maps. How am I doing for time? Good, thanks. And the second of those case studies I'd like to briefly mention is the work we've done on South African census data. So in 2016, we were approached by an academic colleague, Joachim Venner, who's in the Department of Government at LSE, and he said he was interested in examining the relationship between the extent of the franchise in colonial and post-colonial South Africa, how that related to quality of life indicators. And he also said, I notice you've got this excellent run of census volumes in the library statistical data store, run of those volumes. So in partnership, we digitized a run of those volumes and tried to turn those into data sets. So we digitized them, ran software against them to try and extract data tables as Excel spreadsheets with what I would characterize as variable results. The analysis of these data is ongoing, and we're ultimately going to make some or all of the digitized material available via the aforementioned digital library. There's a couple of things I think these projects and other similar kind of special collections and digitization projects have in common. We've tried to apply the precepts of good research data management practice to our own collections, which included managing and enhancing metadata, archiving, digital preservation, providing online access. We also have done a lot of work providing tools for users discovering interpretation of these very rich, but also, certainly in the case of Booth, what can be quite complex archives which require assistance with interpreting. So I would hope that we have learned lessons about in providing RDM services and use that knowledge to inform the work we do with our own collections. So where next? Does anyone recognize that map? It's the Tokyo subway. And I had the fortune to go to Tokyo late last year. That looks horribly complicated, I think, but what I would say also is it's much easier to understand when you're there on the ground. So what can look like a hot mess to someone, perhaps when I'm giving this presentation, it's easier to interpret when you're there. So we're not giving up on all this, and we've got a number of new services that we're looking to roll out over the course of the next year or two. The first of those, which is very much in development at the moment, is a text and data mining service. So we're investigating setting up a support service to help researchers take advantage of the TDM exception in UK copyright law. That exemption allows for copies to be made of copyrighted material, so for example from databases that the library provides. However, many content providers do not publicize that facility or make it easy to do text and data mining operations on their core pie of data. We feel that, at LSE at least, the library is well placed to represent the interests of researchers in exploiting their right to mine, because we steward large collections of text and data which are amenable to these methods, because we negotiate with those content providers. So an LSE service would focus on that side of things, so a kind of information brokerage, I suppose, so giving advice about use of resources and then pointing people in the right direction, to work with tools and methodologies that perhaps our IT services or our academic departments might advise upon. We've rolled out a DOI service, so the provision of DOIs via our research repository. We want to think about how we might expand upon that. So thus far, it's really kind of grey literature that we're able to provide DOIs for. So theses notably, but also things like working paper series. We want to think about how we might expand that. One area for that would be looking at LSE's very well-known portfolio of research blogs. So there's the LSE Impact of Social Sciences blog, it's British Politics and Policy, so a blog very well thought of. We might think about working with them to provide permanent identifiers. We're also making a bid for one of the ESRC safe pods, so to expand on the ability of LSE researchers to access sensitive data. Pods are sponsored by ESRC and allow researchers remote access to government administrative data, especially licensed data held by the UK Data Service. And this, I've already mentioned the kind of secure rooms we have for data access, but we've also, there's a school-wide project to create an ISO 27001 compliant area in our high-performance computing service. So this is various initiatives going on around the school, and we're hoping to contribute to that with the ESRC Safe Pods project. So that's everything I had to tell you. So we're trying to make sense of all this. Here are some image credits just briefly, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neil. I think we'll do a fairly quick turnover to our next presentation because we've got 15 minutes or so for Q&A and discussion at the end of this little batch. But if there's any immediate questions, just facts or things that have jumped out at anyone?
Can I ask what Chris system you use?
Yeah, we're going to be taking the Elsevier, or Elsevier are going to be taking our dollar, and we're going for pure. Okay.
Okay.
Paul Stokes, Jisc as well. You mentioned right at the very end there, 27,001. Any idea what it's going to cost you?
No, not. I could try and find out if you're interested.
Yeah. Has anyone else done an ISO 27001 audit? Matthew, do you have a sense of how much it costs?
It depends where you start from. We started from a greenfield site, so we built it in from when we started the business. Someone full-time for 6 months to even put the basics in place, and then it's audits every 6 to 12 months after that. So, yeah, if you try and retrofit it, yeah, good luck. It will take a lot.
Okay.
So, and 27001, I'm getting this right, is a secure data service kind of infrastructure, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Masood?
Masood Coker, Lancaster University. Just adding to the 27,001 discussion, we've looked at it. It is very costly, but we do have a need for it. So it does not overcompensate for the need. And actually, I agree with Matthew that retrofitting it is a lot more difficult than actually building it completely brand new as a new facility.
It's worth saying that our high-performance computing unit is a relatively new service at LSE, and is so hopefully we'll have the wherewithal to be able to apply that standard to it. But I guess we shall see.
Moving away from the 27,001 bit, have you had any particular difficulties in making the case internally for all this?
No, well, not necessarily. LSE Library is fortunate in that it's well funded. With the digital asset management system that we're procuring at the moment, we did have to explain, do that advocacy to explain why it was necessary to get yet another of these repositories. The RDM service has all been, as you might have gleaned, has been fairly kind of soft services, which our data librarian Lawrence Horton has been able to take on as part of the his kind of day-to-day work. So we haven't really had to argue for massive amounts of new resourcing. We've managed to carve it out of current budgets and personnel and so on.
Fantastic. I think we should
move on, though. We did say it was 1 or 2 short questions, and you've done pretty well in terms of getting quizzed. So thank you very much, Neil. Our second case study, Kirsty Langstadt from Edinburgh University, looking at coordinating data across the university from a library and university collections perspective.
That's okay. Right, okay, hopefully you can all hear me okay. I'm Kirsty Langstadt, I'm Head of Digital Library at the University of Edinburgh. I'm going to very much be talking from my perspective, and please bear in mind that I've only been at the university for about a year, well, just over a year now. And I've come from a kind of memory institution previously, so I've got perhaps slightly a different perspective on things as well, and that digital preservation strand is very important to me and will be something that I'll be returning to. So the University of Edinburgh, you can see a nice sort of side shot there of Old College, is one of the older and ancient institutions in Scotland, is one of the Russell Group of universities, has 3 colleges, and obviously we have research going across both medicine sciences, veterinary, and also arts, humanities, and social sciences. So a very wide spectrum of research data that the university is dealing with. And when I first arrived at the university, I thought it's a really large institution and research data is what they're all about, and it'll all be really easy and it'll be a well kind of set up infrastructure. And it involved many teams. Well, I was right about it involving many, many teams. It certainly does, and it's something that we all collaborate on, something other speakers have touched on. But it's not always straightforward, and there's a lot of advocacy involved. So within the digital library team, the reason that we have become more involved in research data is that digital preservation element. So we're very much focusing on collections discovery across both the university and outwith of all our collections, and that includes research data. We very much look at digitization and making content accessible. Digital preservation, but very much looking at the sort of more technology and sort of supporting solutions. We've got colleagues who look much more at the digital archiving, appraisal, and what should or shouldn't be kept. And also we're beginning to work in the area of digital scholarship, but again, tools to support the researchers and others to do that work. So what I'm going to just touch on today is our existing research data management services, and some of it will have echoes in Neil's talk, but also I'm sure the upcoming speakers as well. Then also kind of look a bit more at services we're currently developing, which we see having a wider application, not just for research data, but we're also considering using for other types of data, and as part of that sort of digital preservation. And how all this work over the last year has begun to change our thinking round about digital preservation. And I suppose I would kind of echo William's comment. I found myself no longer just talking about digital preservation because it's not something that the university instantly jumps up and down and goes, yes, we must do that for all our different data types that we hold. But I'm much more talking about long-term accessibility and changing the language to kind of sort of suit what the context is and what's required, and also where people are coming from, because not everyone has my sort of desire to make sure that what we need in the future will also be there in the future and be accessible and usable in that particular way. So that's one of the other things. So I mentioned multiple teams, and the teams that I've just pulled out and I'm highlighting here are very much the teams within information services that are providing the services. And you can very quickly see that it's an approach that goes across quite a wide range. So we do indeed have a data librarian. Our head of data library is Robin Rice, so a quick shout out to her. And also, if any of you are looking to find out any more, she just recently wrote and published the Data Librarians Handbook, essential reading for everyone, I would suggest, and heads up the research data services team who provide advice and guidance across the university. There's also the research support services, my colleagues who sit in library and university collections, who again provide advice and guidance, deal with scholarly communications, but also the different research management systems, ACRIS systems, and so on. IT infrastructure is a key component and have their own research services team. Ourselves very much looking at technology solutions, The Digital Curation Centre, now they're in a different colour. They are part of and based in Edinburgh University, but they work right across the UK with many institutions, and they've already been mentioned here today. And again, I'll be mentioning them later on as well. But also, latterly, our IT security team have increasingly become a kind of core component of when we're looking at developing and looking at what we need to do. So it is very much a kind of multi-team effort just on the service provision, and then obviously we've got all the different academics we're dealing with. We've just launched a new roadmap for research data management, which we've all been involved in pulling together, and this is the front cover of it. And you can see very much we're beginning to focus increasingly not so much on our services, but what is it that our users are looking for, and talking to them in a way that they will understand a little bit more. So we're very much looking at the before, during, and after. So this is what it translates to. And again, we're trying very much to put our users at the heart of these services that we're providing and trying to simplify what is a very complex picture and kind of ecosystem in the background so that they're much less aware of it. And I think we've got quite a way to go yet in this particular space. So, just again highlighting that multidisciplinary team that we're doing. Before your research project begins, we've got DMP Online, created by the Digital Curation Centre, which we're very much working with. We've got our own team who provide support, review of data management plans, advice and guidance, and training in this kind of area. So that's the sort of before element that we're currently offering right across the university. During the research project, you can see, again, different numbers of teams involved, and again, there's more of a focus, obviously, on the information technology infrastructure side of things, because of course people are much more looking for needing active data storage, active areas to work in, and we've got a whole series of different services here. So we've got everything from data store, which is the active data storage, data safe haven, which again is going for ISO compliance, for much more sensitive data. We've got data sync, and a variety of other things. We're very fond of the word data something, as you'll discover, and that's a theme throughout the university. And it's something that I'll come back to again, because it does have its issues. And then after the research project's finished, we've got data share. We're working on Data Vault, and I'll come back and talk a bit more about that. And also we're using Pure for sort of data asset registers. So as you can see, quite a complex infrastructure. It's also, I should say, a very mature service. It's been going for a very long period of time, and have been working in this particular space for quite a number of years. And I think that's kind of reflected by the fact that I say this is our kind of third roadmap, which we just launched in 2017. But the first roadmap and policy was developed in 2011 at the university. And even before that, there were quite a number of services in place. And in fact, data share, which is looking at small data sets that can be put in long-term preservation. Data share has the data seal of approval, although I do realize that's changed name now, and is available and allows you to share data and make it openly accessible with any researcher who wishes to use it and reuse it. And that was launched in 2007-08, and even prior to that we were building on services. So it's a very established service at the university. And that's also reflected in the training and support that's provided throughout the process. And I suppose when touching on William's point from the sort of beginning, Mantra, and which is kind of online training, and also the RDMS MOOC, which is available on Coursera, are all kind of elements that are open and accessible to everyone to allow them to learn more about what you need to think about, what the core principles, and the course even contains a module around about digital preservation and key elements that need to be considered. So when I said we're very much looking at what our users are wanting, we've managed to kind of move there with our roadmap. This is our current website, and while you can see some of those strands of kind of before, during, and after kind of coming through, it's less well articulated, and this is a sort of hangover from our sort of previous website. So we've got more work to do in that particular space in order to sort all of that out. But what we have done is try to communicate with our users more and do it in different formats. So everything from live events to, there's a YouTube link. You can watch the video and be wowed and astounded as to how to go about it and how simple and easy it really is as well. And here's an example of what data share looks like when you get onto the website. But one of the things we've discovered is that our users really do struggle with our proliferation of different services. We've had slight variations on you can share your data here, you can put it away securely, it's safe and secure, and so on. So our constant use of data share is a real issue and something that we're having to look at. And a very sort of nice example was when someone said, right, I want to put my data in this particular storage and kind of sort of solution, so I want to use Data Vault. And we said, right, that's fine. And then 6 months later, they came back and said, now my research is no longer under embargo and I can release it, so I want to move it to data share. And that actually, behind the scenes, is a hugely complex operation. But what he hadn't realized was that actually data share allows you to embargo your information and then release it so that you can share it when you want to. So I think we've realized that simplicity is what we're striving for with our users, even though there's quite a complex network, a bit like a Zen garden, behind the scenes. And we really need to work on that. Users don't understand what all these different names mean. What they want to do is, I want my data to do X, Y, and Z, and we really need to approach our sort of front end and the website from that perspective and then kind of deliver the solutions seamlessly that meet their users. So that's one of the key elements of the roadmap, and that's what we're going to be working on over the next 3 years to make it much simpler, much more seamless behind the scenes, so the researcher doesn't really need to know and they will go automatically to the right service. So you can wish us luck with that, because I think it'll take a bit of time and a lot more work with our users. So I want to come to something we're developing very much for research data, because that's where the funding's coming from a number of sources, both from Jisc and within the university, but it's something that we very much have reflected upon over the last year and see as being usable in different contexts, and that's Data Vault. Data Vault came about from developed 2 years ago, partnership with Jisc and Manchester University, and both ourselves and Manchester have continued working on this. But we've gone slightly tangentially, each of us. For us, this was very much, Data Vault is something where you can put data for up to 10 years, meets all your funders' requirements, and you can be confident that at the 10-year period, you'll be able to get it out and it'll be there. And then you can review and decide what you want to do with that data. A lot of our researchers say, I'm meeting funders' requirements, but this data will be out of date almost as soon as I've placed it in the Data Vault. And therefore, at the end of the 10 years, my most likely thing is that I want to press the delete button and get rid of that. I won't want to keep it. Other people say they're not sure about what's going to be of interest and not. And so again, this gives them that ability to kind of rethink it. And you can already see that this is something that we might want to apply to other types of data set. So that's what we started out with. Quite simple, and here's the architecture we designed. We were also looking for a cost-effective solution to store this material, so we're using tape storage with only one version up in the cloud, an absolute emergency copy if things go pear-shaped and we need to retrieve it. But the project changed, and I think that's to do a lot with the context that Edinburgh's working in. We're very much looking at data, big data. Edinburgh was recently awarded a city deal on the basis that we were going to become the data capital in Europe. And a lot of our work through the different institutes and the colleges is focusing on big data. And we're seeing that shift throughout. So suddenly, Data Vault, which was initially designed for 500 megabytes, is now going to cope with 10 terabytes. That's what we're trying to build a solution for. And that's given us quite a range of challenges in order to develop this solution. And it has made us occasionally stop and go, is there a solution out there that can do what we want? And we've talked a lot with Manchester, who are also developing this for the university there. But there's not, and I think, again, this is very symptomatic of digital preservation out there, there's not a solution off the shelf that you can just buy and easily bring in. We haven't reached the point where digital preservation is a commodity, and so we're still building and developing developmental services. And one of the problems we encountered, and again, just sort of pulling back and thinking around about the digital preservation aspects of research data, was when we implemented it and started moving up to 2 terabytes of data being moved across this system and into the sort of storage and onto the tape, the checksumming and the Bagot library stopped working, and we couldn't work out what was happening. So trying to transfer 250,000 files, and it all fell over. Links weren't maintained, we had empty directories which weren't maintained, file names began to be modified. So suddenly we couldn't guarantee that the data was going to be reusable because the changes to content. And this actually sparked a big debate about should we checksum or not? And again, we were sort of drawing then back on the work we've been doing in digital preservation of, well, yes, we do have to checksum, and here's the reasons why. You know, with this volume of data, with the timescales we're keeping it, we will encounter bit rot. We need to know and need to be able to do this. Now, thankfully, in the end, it turned out not to be an issue with the Bagot specification, but the implementation of PHP and the Java libraries, and we did get it all resolved. But the reason I'm highlighting this is it is the developmental nature of, or experimental nature of these projects. And so what we do find when we're delivering something from project to service, our estimates continually are blown out to the water, and we have to spend more time investigating solution than we actually do on kind of development time when delivering this. Another element that kind of threw a spanner in the works was security. So GDPR has been coming along, and I'm sure all of you will have been looking at this issue from a sort of range of different perspectives. But we suddenly realized that this was a kind of major factor on what we were delivering. And we had a huge discussion around about should we encrypt, should we not encrypt, how do we go about it? And again, it's added extra layers, extra investigation time in order to develop it. But this is what we're finally going to end up with, and this is our sort of final model. And we're hoping, if all goes smoothly and testing works well, and again, testing when you're trying to shift 10 terabytes of data across onto tape takes a little bit of time. So again, we're finding that one of the challenges too, but we're hoping that that will be the end product, which we'll hopefully have early summer. So we've learned a lot through it, and again, we're very much looking, this is the solution that we're developing for Jisc, but we're aware also that this can be used in other contexts. And I think that's the thing I've been particularly struck by, this discussion around about research data, digital preservation. We're actually trying to do very similar things, but it's changed a lot of our thinking. Within University of Edinburgh, we have very rich collections, we have repositories, library, archive, museum collections, and again, within libraries and universities collections, we're looking at digital archiving of our kind of born digital archive material. So actually, we've really benefited from working on research data because it's helped and changed our thinking. We've got an efficient and effective solution around about our court and senate records, which are now being digitally preserved. We're beginning to think around about what else we might do with our digitized content. But for born digital donations, we're beginning to recognize that Data Vault might actually offer us some solutions. Because actually, when you're using digital preservation techniques, if something does not get or is able to have files identified, so using pronom, and you don't get those kind of file identifiers back, then actually we're sort of slightly stuck. But Data Vault offers us a solution whereby we can place that content, we know it's secure, we know it's being looked after, and we can come back to it and kind of then look at it when technology's moved on, tools have moved on, and allow us to kind of reevaluate and come back to it. So I think that's a really, really important thing around about this. So I think from starting off at a point where digital preservation was a single path and it was going to be around about data migration, a particular approach, particular tools and techniques, we now recognize that actually that there are many paths and that what we're actually building is a kind of eco-structure with different sort of systems connecting to each other rather than just one single solution. And it is through working on research data and working in partnership right across the university that we've increasingly come to that conclusion. And I have to say, I think we've really identified that. We're beginning to look at what do we have, what can we use, how can we use it, what else is out there that we can use for things like our digitized content, so exploring locks for that. I think I'm very much thinking, just need to keep calm and think what else is out there and what other solutions and how can we kind of plug that and fit it into our systems, but there's nothing that is one solution for everything. And I've really welcomed that kind of new way of thinking that has emerged through the work that we've been doing on research data and digital preservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. I've been told to stand over here beside this gloomy portrait. Where apparently I'm in shot. I don't know whether that means the gloomy portrait's in shot as well. But anyway, we'll do a relatively quick turnover again, unless there's any immediate questions for Kirsty.
I get to escape. Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. So next up, and the last of our 3 case studies. I was going to say Valerie's the home team, but then I realised we've got people from the Glasgow School of Art, and that's more home. But then there's someone also from the Royal College, so that is home. So I do sort of mean the home team then, with Valerie and digital preservation at the University of Glasgow.
Hi everyone, so thanks very much for inviting me along here today. When I was asked to come along here, I said, I'm not very sure what I can tell people that might be of interest to them. And particularly as I took a gamble and I decided to pick up and focus on digital preservation, hoping that most of my previous case studies would focus on research data management and the services at their university. That's quite interesting because we know quite a lot about data management, I think, but less so about digital preservation. So maybe you can think of this as my sort of virtual busking session, and there's a virtual hat down there where if you know better than me as I go along, please throw your virtual advice at me or contact me at any point to share the secrets with me, because I'm really here to learn from you. What are we trying to do with digital preservation at the University of Glasgow? We are trying to look at recommendations for digital preservation so that we can set up a service for our key business and cultural assets. We want to set up robust systems and processes to address the essential requirements. We have done a first draft of our requirements, and they're on our fledgling blog for anyone to look at, and we'll be updating them as part of our pilot project over the next few months. We're really interested in good practice exchange, and it's great to come to events like this where we can share with peers and other events out there. Obviously, what we do is mainly paid for by the taxpayer, so anything we can do to do this more efficiently is great as far as we're concerned. Types of things similar to Edinburgh. We've got extensive archival collections, we've got our research data, and we've got our university business records that we're thinking about. How are we going to digitally preserve these? So drilling into that in a wee bit more detail, some of the types of things that we're looking at are exam papers. There's also lots of committee papers that are the corporate memory of the organisation. Each of them has their own challenge, their own set of quirks and problems round about them. We have to think, which of these things do we need to digitally preserve, which are most important, and what proportion of those needs preserved? And how are we going to do that? So I wanted to tell you a wee bit about how we configure support for digital preservation, and I know, William, you got a question offline about that as well. So we have an established research data service. I'm not going to repeat what Neil and Kirsty have already explained in any detail about that, but we do give grant application advice. We review data management plans. We've got an established data registry and repository, and we have routine training courses for staff and students and give ad hoc advice. Now, there are a number of committees at the University of Glasgow who have responsibility and interest in digital preservation. So our Information Policy and Strategy Committee oversees IT strategy. And a subgroup of that is our Information Governance Group, which approves policies. And we've just recently had our digital preservation policy approved by that group, and we will make it public sometime soon when we get round to it. Now, we've also got our Research Planning and Strategy Committee, and they look after research good practice, research data, open access, and they make changes to policies round about those topics. So obviously all the open science stuff features in those policies. We work on management by exception basis. So those committees exist, but we tend to contact them when we think there needs to be a change in policy, if we want specific advice from them, or we perhaps need someone to take a lead role in something. We need a vice principal's name to put on a paper, for example. And otherwise, we get on with the day-to-day work, and we don't really bother these committees too much, nor do they bother us. So we also have a Digital Preservation Steering Committee, and that sounds rather formal. But really that's just us doing the work. It's effectively the project team who are working on the pilot, and it's got a collection of people from different areas in the university. We like to think of it as topic-based rather than as individual departments or teams. So we just look around and say, what expertise do we need in order to deliver this functionality? So we've got our research information management team. That's my team. We're involved in this, and we've already got a service that we provide for preserving research data sets. We've also got archives and special collections representatives. Got Gemma in the, sorry, we haven't got Gemma in the room. We've got archives and special collections experts. They know what data we hold, what information we've got in our collections. They know what the quirks and issues round about those data sets and the information is. And they've also got extensive experience in archives and records management that's easily applicable to our new world of digital preservation, so we rely on them quite heavily. Got IT services colleagues involved there, so they know the infrastructure of the university, they know all of the technology that we've got, and they've got an eye on the future and they understand what technology is coming along. We've got Freedom of Information and Data Protection Office involved in this, and we have got Gemma in the room here today, and so these people keep us right on sensitive data and regulations round about managing information sets. Okay, so there is much wider interest in the university in this digital preservation activity. So we have regular meetings with college support where we try to keep them abreast of activities in research information management, including digital preservation, and they're interested in that. We've also got a college IT group, and we meet regularly with the representatives there. That originated as a group where we could talk about research data management specifically. What support do we give centrally? What support do the colleges give to these people? But when I mentioned digital preservation, there was a lot of excitement in the group there, and we're really hoping that we can engage some of the experts there to get involved in a bit of the testing that we're going to be doing. A few other examples I'd like to throw in of connections and people that we rely on as part of our digital preservation and data management activities. We have a copyright centre at the University of Glasgow based in our School of Law. It's called Create, and we quite often ask them ad hoc questions about legal things, about copyright, about licenses. They're really, really helpful to us, and we've got a good relationship with them. So recently, we've been doing a bit of work with Jisc, looking at some issues around dataset licensing and confusion. What do we mean by this license? What can the end user do with it? There's still a bit of confusion, and we wanted to create some new materials to try and help users understand what they could use data for, but also creators understand what licenses to apply to their data sets so that other people could use them. And I'm delighted that our Create colleagues have taken on some of the work of that and are looking at it from a legal perspective. But what's also nice is, apparently we're just not a drain on their energy. They like us to engage with them because we're practitioners and they get real life examples of activities that they're able to comment on and give advice on. So that's one link, and this is just a front slide that Thomas came along and gave a talk at one of our recent data licensing workshops, so he's very much part of that community. We also work with our Urban Big Data Centre, which is based in our School of Education, and again we had a speaker from the Urban Big Data Centre come along to our recent licensing workshop. We talked to them things like common issues, common training opportunities, make sure that we're not duplicating effort. They have lots of expertise that we can learn from, so we're very, very pleased to be able to rely on that. We also sometimes get ad hoc approached by people, which is really nice. So this is Brian. Brian is interested in research into conservation and preservation, and he actually recently asked if he could attend one of the Digital Preservation Coalition's events through the University of Glasgow membership. And we were delighted that he was able to do that. I've actually had a couple of meetings with Brian, hooking him up with our digital preservation activity at the university, and we hope that we'll work with him a wee bit more in the future. We also work with our colleagues at the Digital Preservation Coalition, and we've established a West of Scotland forum, which we've called I Preserve. And it's a forum for discussing all things digital preservation in the West of Scotland. We've had a couple of events already. They have been extremely popular and filled up really quickly.
If you're interested in getting involved in that and coming along, the best thing to do is to sign up to the Jisc Digital Preservation mailing list, and you'll get notified when we're running our next event. So, what are we actually doing with regards to this digital preservation? So, we are delighted that we are part of the Jisc Research Data Shared Service pilot. And when this pilot started to emerge, then lots of the organisations that have got research data management requirements got involved in that. Now, we've got an established research data management service, so we weren't so interested in that side of things, other than, of course, if they come up with better pricing structures, cheaper storage options, we may be interested in some of those outputs and piggybacking on them. But what we were really, really interested in was the digital preservation aspect of this. So we've become engaged on the digital preservation side of this. Jisc are here, they're going to tell you a bit more about the broader project. I'll just focus in on the digital preservation activities at Glasgow for now. So what we are actually doing is we've got 2 different software platforms that we're going to be testing. One of those we've already got passwords for. We're busy trying to test that just now. And the second, my colleague Matt, who's in the room there, is going along for training next week. So we're getting busy with that. We've got to enhance our requirements. They're quite high level at the moment, so we've got a bit more work to do on those. We're looking at system integration. We've got existing systems in our university that we need to integrate with. We were quite pleased when Jisc mentioned that they would like to look at integration to ePrints. ePrints is the software that we use for our data registry, so we're quite interested in getting involved in that. We've uncovered a few data protection issues that we need to have a look at, and we realise there will be quite a number of training requirements that emerge from this that we're going to have to deal with. But again, coming back to the collaboration, that aspect is really, really important for us. Through the Digital Preservation Coalition, through activities like this, through our Open Access Scotland group, and beyond, we really appreciate hearing what other people are doing and getting advice from other people. I would mention as well on data protection, since that came up, we've got an event on the 31st of January through the Open Access Scotland group about GDPR and open access and open data. There's a few spaces if anybody wants to sign up to that. So we have actually got quite a lot to do. We've got a fledgling blog. We will be blogging on that about our project, but we have a lot to do. We're not experts, and really we'd encourage anyone to get in touch with us if they have any advice, recommendations, or just want to share our journey. Thank you. That's all I've got to say. Thanks for listening.
Again, I'm going to take my position over here beside this. No, actually, I should be at the front for this bit, because we're going to do Q&A, aren't we? So are there any quick questions for Valerie before we proceed to a kind of wider Q&A? Well done, I think you got away with it. And we've got some time for a kind of broader Q&A before lunch. Again, I kind of come back to our original question for today, which is to establish the kind of joint requirements, really, between research data management and the broader need for institutional, or the broader opportunity for institutions to develop digital preservation strategies. And maybe that's a theme I could turn to, if you like, for each of our speakers in turn, or maybe invite others to comment. So maybe I could start by putting one or two of this, coming back to one of the speakers, Kirsty in particular. You talked about the range of different activities within Edinburgh University converging. And I suppose my question is whether that happened by accident or whether that took a great deal of patient engineering. I suppose maybe a bit of both would be a fair summary.
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's also recognising the kind of common interests, but I think it's also within kind of library and university collections, recognising that there are multiple solutions to some of the issues, and also learning from our colleagues in other areas. So I think it's been that kind of sort of shared learning and journey, and also the debates and discussions we've had around about research data and that accessibility sort of 10 years down the line on the Data Vault project have kind of brought a really good understanding of what we can bring to the table as well.
Yes.
So I think that's led to us recognizing there are different solutions, and I think something Paul would be quite pleased about is that recognition of costs of digital preservation, and actually we need to do more of a risk analysis around about what is the value of some of our material, and therefore how much should we spend on trying to preserve it for the longer term, and again taking that on board and looking at different solutions.
Yeah. So can I follow up then with a kind of based, I mean, Valerie gave a very good presentation of, for example, the working parties, the management groups. And I know that's quite a, I don't say it's a boring topic, but you know what I mean? There's something quite kind of nitty-gritty about it. But how do, in Edinburgh University, you've obviously made that progress towards that sort of being able to use that shared infrastructure for a institution-wide requirements. Is that based on, you know, working parties, committees? How does that, how has that change been implemented in practice?
I mean, I think again, like Glasgow, we have a sort of digital preservation steering group, which is kind of across, but sort of slightly smaller subset than at Glasgow. But then when it comes to the research data projects and committees, there's a vast number of those, and we've been successful in ensuring that we've got a sort of seat at a number of those, and that sort of helped the conversation along. And because within research data management, university right across the board is interested in that, and unfortunately they don't get very excited when I say digital preservation. They get excited about research and what it can unlock. So being in those kind of committees and meetings, and there's about 3 or 4 different committees, that has had a significant change and helped that.
And Neil, maybe I could nudge you as well on the same same topic.
Yeah, I suppose policy-wise, I think it would be fair to say that the library's been left to get on with it.
Right.
For digital preservation. I think we're seen to be we're acknowledged to be experts. We do have the challenges with our IT people. When we start talking about research data management, they respond with how much storage do you need, and that is the end of the supposed to be the end of the conversation. So we've got advocacy to do on that front. But so it's kind of blessing and a curse, I suppose, that we are left to get on with it, and that means we have to take the lead, I think, and we need to do more on digital preservation. I would say.
It presumably makes decision making slightly simpler, though, insofar as there's a
yeah, but it also means that we get little input on the direction that the school thinks we should take. So we do need, I think, personally speaking, I need senior managers to give me a steer on where we should be going with this.
Kirsty?
If I can just pick up on that, while research services quite often are very sort of keen on the storage element, when encryption and the security aspect came about, that sort of sparked a really interesting debate about if you're encrypting and who's managing that. So research services and that team are actually going to be dealing with that, but they then said, oh, but you said that's not great for digital preservation, and again sparked that kind of conversation and discussion. So it's been about building that relationship and having the discussions, and then beginning to realize, especially when you sort of bring out examples and kind of highlight case studies, that actually it's not just about the storage, it's not that simple, there are other factors to consider.
Any other questions from the floor? I've got plenty, but I don't want to take over. From the front here.
Thank you. It's Nicola Simonson from the Glasgow School of Art again. I've got a role that is records management as well as repository and to some extent research data management. So I was really interested in the Edinburgh and Glasgow speakers talking about thinking about digital preservation of records. I'm interested in where those things are being stored now and what sort of solutions are being used at the moment when you're thinking about moving to more sort of digital preservation.
Maybe I could invite Valerie and Kirsty to follow up.
Didn't quite catch the question, but was it what software you're using for digital preservation?
think we are just busy basically having a look at them and appraising what we want to choose to digitally preserve at the moment. So we've got the standard traditional records management all in place, and we are having a look to see which of these things do we need to select for digital preservation. They're in lots of different places. So the list that I showed you, we've got, where is this record now? So some of them are in our, we've got a document management system, so some of them are in that, some of them are just in shared drives, some of them are paper files. So everywhere, yes, all sorts of different issues associated with that.
Let me guess, every possible complication has managed to be created all at the same time.
For our court and senate records, we are using Data Safe Haven as the sort of storage location for that particular material, and that's the sort of storage infrastructure, and we're using we're using Archive Space and also Archivematica in order to kind of take them through that process. So that's in action, and if you want to talk to Kirsty Chapman-Lee, our digital archivist, she'll be happy to talk you through that in a lot more detail. And then for the other data sets, we're looking at different solutions which will then have different storage elements to it, because there's kind of different cost elements there.
Neil?
Yeah, just very briefly, we've got something similar going on at LSE at the moment. So there's a building the archive project, which the school archivist is leading on. So we've got a separate school archive section, which is doing everything from looking at what's held in our SharePoint directories through to how we better manage the safes in which the deeds to various LSE properties are kept. So it's cross-cuts all sorts of different, quite complicated areas. So it's tricky.
I wonder if I could ask if there's anyone. So the presentations we've had so far, both Juan and the three case studies, have all been from kind of substantial research institutions of one form or another. It seems to me that the research community, on the basis of all the investment, the policy frameworks, the work that Jisc is doing, the other components which are in place, suggests to me that the research and higher education community should be well placed relative to other sectors to develop digital preservation solutions. I mean, even if they don't manage this kind of nice, kind of easy stretch to cover the rest of the institutional records. I wonder if there's anyone from, is there anyone from outside of a kind of research institution or outside of a higher education institution kind of keen to get their hands on or interested in getting their hands on any of this kind of research data material? I'm interested to know what the rest of the world can learn in effect outside of higher education and research from this experience. Joe, hold a moment, we'll get the microphone.
I'd say that quite often organisations don't realise that the information's there. Mm-hmm. So it's, if you made it accessible, they would want to use it. But unless you actually advertise that it's there, I think, yeah, quite often they've got absolutely, they believe it's, you know, kept within higher education and it's not really allowed to go elsewhere.
I see. So they're not able to access the data or know that the data is accessible to them. So they can't take advantage of the open data, the open science kind of movement. Others? Well, I'm not going to keep you from lunch. That would be a bad thing to do. Shall we leave it there for now? I'm aware that I think lunch is ready in about 5 minutes, but I'm assuming it'll be out fairly quickly. It's downstairs where registration was. So maybe we could just draw this session to a close to thank our speakers, introduction and case studies very much. And back here at, I think it's I'm out here without the timetable, 13:45 I think is the start time for the next session. And we'll hear more from the Jisc itself about the Research Data Shared Service after lunch. So thank you all very much. I'll see you in about an hour. Thank you.